talk about face-to-face at Antietam. This is a preview type thingy, and that means sort of a play test as well, I guess. So I like games of this sort of size and format in terms of like, hey, you know, it's not too big, I could fit this in a coat pocket, it's just decks of cards, it leads a certain flavor to it that I kind of expect. And this game doesn't quite match that flavor, which is important. So one of the things that I like about something like a card game, and Dixie, I kind of remember being in this realm, is I could bring it to like a coffee house, back when coffee houses allowed you to smoke. Not so interested now. And just, you know, play on a fairly small table like one would with a game of Magic or whatever. Okay, granted, Magic sometimes spills over, but this has a little too big a footprint to feel like that to me. It took up my large card table and then a little bit. Probably could have squeezed it in fine, but well, not large. My standard size card table, but there was it was fairly long, and there were a lot of die rolls. The die rolls kind of are gonna the buckets of dice type mechanism is gonna be kind of problematic, I think, in that kind of setting. You know, the whole it's also difficult to, you know, you bring cards into a bar, that's one thing. You start chucking bunches of dice, they talk a little different and kind of boot you out. At least in some bars. Not so much in a coffee house. It'd be fine with those. So it's got a little bit of a bigger footprint, so I feel like it has to be, and it takes a fairly long time to play the full game. So I feel like it has to be reviewed under a different sort of paradigm. There are other card games that would probably fit under that same type of harder paradigm. You know, things like Fields of Fire up front definitely are a level above this. Maybe something like Attack Sub. You probably wouldn't want to bring that to a coffee shop. Although, table space wise and length wise, it might not be quite as big. It's still, it feels like too much to be putting in. So it puts a little bit more of an onus on this. This isn't just sort of a fun time killer. Just to get that out of the way, it's a little bit bigger than that. Felt to me like it took more than 2 hours, but I don't know. I don't know what the video is going to come out as, so I'll see once it gets up to YouTube, because I can't tell how long my videos are anymore with this new camera at all. In terms of the historical story that it's presenting, you know, it's fairly abstract. Buckets of dice always kind of works. As I said in one, well, it almost always kind of works. You can have games like the Ben Madison games that use a sort of a buckets of dice type system, but they create such a failure that it doesn't work. But it's a very, very it's a blunt cudgel to use to try to represent things, and that doesn't mean I dislike it. But what it means is mechanically you're doing a lot to represent the kind of effects that you see on a battlefield, which is, hey, I got more stuff there, I get to throw more dice. You don't have things like frontage showing up in here. You sort of do with your reserve, but I gotta tell you, it doesn't feel like it. You cluster, you're throwing down all your units for the most part because you can't afford not to. That's pretty common for war games, to feel like you can't really afford a reserve. I I guess my biggest complaint is the 3 victory sections. The fact that they're converted permanently. I think I would favor something that allows you to maybe, once you capture something, you're automatically the defender, and you have to beat it twice to undo that. So beating it once would flip it over and make you still the defender, but you no longer hold it, and then the second time puts it into play as normal or whatever. I think I'd be more comfortable with that. That might break the game, though. You know, I mean, this is just sort of bouncing ideas off the top of my head in terms of something that would be more pleasing to me. Certainly, I feel that units on the board in a flanking position that have won a location shouldn't be tied down and unable to do anything. Once you take that location, sure, you might have some tiny garrison there or something, but when I've played out these battlefields on a map, your units just keep coming, you know, and they engage and become sort of the flank. So I don't like that, but I'm not positive that that was the designer's intent, to freeze the units there and not allow them to do flanking attacks. I'm just trying to read the rules as best as I can, and I wouldn't be shocked if I got that all wrong. Initiative's kind of interesting in the game because it forces you to commit first, but it does give you some advantage with your flanking forces. Kind of neat trade-off. Does that apply? I don't know. It certainly doesn't represent you are the attacker in any sense of the word. So, you know, it feels like a gaming mechanism that doesn't really directly align with anything, but that's fine. You have to have some of them. It is a game after all. You're abstracting a lot of stuff with the mechanisms in a game, so I can't really complain about that. The brigading, so I kind of like the situation of, you know, you want to get units that are of the same core or whatever together in order to operate, and I like the difference of the decks with that. I think that opens up a minor asymmetry in the game that's kind of pleasing, because the Confederates had larger formations. When you look at something, and again, I don't know how historically accurate this distinction is, when you look at something like the Confederate command structure in a game like CWB, those big formations are easier to order in that game. I'm not sure that's applicable, though. You know, it's like the sub-commander in charge of them should be having more troubles than they are in moving such a large force. So, you know, there's a sort of an idea of span of control, and great, you know, Lee has a smaller span of control and can give orders directly to his subordinates that are maybe better. But honestly, those subordinates may have more trouble than the Union Corps do. So I almost feel like that should kind of come out in the wash. There's probably some optimal number, and I don't think either side has it. The Confederates certainly have more commands than Corps, given that they didn't even have a real Corps structure at Antietam yet. The Union had a whole bunch of tiny corps already and didn't have a wing structure in place, and that could cause some issues. So it's an interesting facet of the game, but like the command rules in CWB, and I don't think I've ever hammered this point down with that system, it doesn't really accurately express the differential, you know. Those big units become too valuable, and in most tactical games I feel like they do, and in a sense this is repeating what may be a flaw in those games, but representing it as a card game. So we'll call that kind of an even. There's something nice that comes out of something like CWB in terms of games where they give the command control, and I'll give that same pass here for this. The importance of the sunken road. The sunken road determines the initiative. Initiative has advantages and some disadvantages. The amount of stars that you have at the sunken road is important. Certainly it's a key facet of the battlefield. The key facet, perhaps. And it anchors your forces, etc. I don't mind this. Again, it feels not completely linked in. But again, what do you want from a game that's trying to represent the terrain with cards, etc.? It gives you something, and that's nice. Oh, the forces coming in as reinforcements to your hand. How random they are? Well, the game would be horrible if they weren't random. So let's say that's a good thing. I mean, again, the choice to play with cards means that I think that this is a good solution to give an interesting and diverse experience throughout. The rules are definitely sketchy and need to be nailed down better to say exactly what they mean. There's no question of that in my mind. I like the event deck. I think that's a cool aspect. However, damn, that burst factor, I don't know why that, basically you're able to reposition your forces almost entirely to avoid any effect from that. So I'm not sure that the defender is all that impacted by the artillery fire randomized burst. For heavy artillery only, it almost seems like an extra layer of complexity, an extra little piece of complexity that's tagged on there that isn't really serving a lot of purpose and is causing extra burden on the players. The actual play is going to be that decision of, hey, over the dice and the special abilities for the general. And let's just talk about the special abilities for the general. At least in a few cases, am really disturbed by them. Some people seem way too strong. Some people don't have particularly useful abilities. Others have abilities that, like Burnside, that I think are way too useful for who he is. Now, we've already talked about the exchanging leaders. That's got to be limited, and whatever the designer decides to do to limit that, and he's expressed an interest in doing so, it should take care of that problem. But what you're basically doing is you're applying force in terms of, I got these different troop cards in my hand, to the probability of how the dice are going to work with you, with the bonuses that you're able to play, etc. To that decision of how much force do I allocate to any specific one of these location cards, or to the flanks. And that's a nice, clean concept. The gripe to it is the amount of die rolling for me. That's the big thing that kind of kills this for me. I don't mind buckets of dice that much, but I'm rolling a hell of a lot of dice again and again and again over the course of this game. I wouldn't play Terrible Swift Sword or the CWB system or something if it involved rolling bunches of dice at once for each flank or whatever. It just would not interest me. It wouldn't be telling enough of the story to get that simplified result. I would rather something that used a lot less die rolling in it. And I feel like most of the card style wargame-ish type things don't have you throw tons of dice again and again and again throughout the course of the game. And that's just really a personal taste thing. What this almost feels like is kind of a battle board situation for some strategic game. Now, obviously, with all the cards and everything in it, but what I'm talking about is this buckets of dice resolution to a round of combat, and then pull the pieces off. You know, say you got three segments in a battle board, and you roll buckets of dice on each one, and then after one round of that, you assess how the battle as a whole went. Something similar. Well, I don't know. I was going to say to the campaign. The Clash of Arms campaign game that I was doing. But that doesn't use buckets of dice. That uses a few key critical die rolls, which I think would just work better towards my tastes. However, I think there is a workable game here that tells a historical story that's somewhat believable. You know, maybe as much so as you'd see on a tactical game. For me, the idea of distilling a tactical game to a card game, unless it's going to get that, wow, I can play this really light game, you know, in a coffee shop type situation on a small table, kind of loses its appeal, because I'm very much a let me see the geometry of the map type situation. So these types of games, it's hard to make that barrier. The ones that I do like that are card-based military games that I feel deserve that kind of level of detail. Well, Attack Sub is one of them. I'd say Down in Flames was another, although Down in Flames has a lighter footprint than this or than Attack Sub. I have a lot of trouble when you start putting me on the ground trying to play a card game on the ground where the cards don't form terrain or anything like that you'd fight over. So, you know, again, that's just a personal taste type thing. It's not quite ready for prime time yet. I think there are a couple of issues that may need to be ironed out. There's certainly stuff that needs to be ironed out in terms of the roles. The question is, are there things that, is there an interpretation of this rules that I feel is strong enough to hold up if it's nailed down right? There's some stuff that would need to get cleaned out. Like, again, the artillery bursts, I don't think that really adds much to the game, unless I'm misinterpreting the design intent entirely on that. What would be interesting is an option that changes the setup somewhat. That would be kind of neat, because one of the things about the determination of a battlefield, when you're dealing with this random deck of cards, to some extent there's sort of a maybe there could be an ahistorical scenario or whatever, and you know that could be come up with that could be determined later in terms of, like, take a look at the campaign and how it developed initially, and were there other plausible developments that could have happened initially. Now those might cause some issues there. But yeah, I mean, I'm lukewarm on it. Let's just put it that way. You know, but I don't get too excited about anything. So there you have it. That's about all I can really think of. Let me just skim through this, see if there's anything. So the brigades gave you a number of oh, yeah, okay. So the difference between loosely organized forces, no commander, no brigades, a 1 in 6 chance of hitting for each unit there, shows the chaos of sort of unorganized forces. 2, there's a commanding general there. Now this feels like it's going in the wrong direction. There's a commanding general there, brings you to 5 or 6. And then there's solid heavy formations under that commanding general, brings you to 4, 5, or 6. That differentiation feels too large, but I respect the decision. Unless you change the dice that are involved, or went with a system other than buckets of six-sided dice, what can you do? You know, where I say it seems a little opposite is you've got commanders who are essentially, well, in some cases divisional, in other cases corps commanders, who are giving their bonus to however big a group of forces you have, but then if you manage to align the right command together, you get additional bonuses. So I think that's okay. The healing. So this almost represents more of a fatigue, recover stragglers, stuff like that. Not sure that that should be based on how many. Again, this is a historical rather than a gameplay type thing, and that's where I'm going to hit most of the time. I'm not sure it should be based on how many formations, how many brigades you have, whatever that means. It doesn't seem to really be brigades. It seems more to be divisions or corps, but grouped together in units of brigade size. How many brigades you have may represent that allows you to pull units back for recovery. I'm not sure that's really the right flavor there. I'm trying to think what would make more sense. Certainly the formations are going to bring you your hospitals and stuff, so there's some argument in favor of that. It feels more to me when you're looking at a tactical situation, the main thing that allows you to pull units off the line is how much force you have standing there, how much reserve you have that you can put in play. And that would play with a very different force structure. So the force structure to the game, play cards to the location you want to, is very simple. And in some ways that's, a big bonus. Simplicity is great if it works. But to another extent, the concept of pulling units back, resting them in reserve, has more to do with whether or not you can withdraw them. And I'm not really convinced that I have formations throughout the entire battlefield. Like maybe on the flanks I've got real formations built up, but in the main line I don't. I don't know if that really makes sense. I almost feel like the withdrawals should have to do with you have a formation sitting at that location maybe that's holding the line better, something along those lines, rather than across the whole battlefield. I have, 2 formations, therefore I get my 3 withdrawals. And I can take them where I have no formations whatsoever. I'm definitely not saying units of the formation that you're saying. I'm actually saying that a formation would have to stand in the line in order to allow units in that location to withdraw. That may be too much complexity though for the simplicity that is a bonus. That's about it, I think. I would suggest using smaller dice. Again, there's too many dice rolled at one time. My hands aren't all that big. They're guy hands, but, that fills my hand. And I could have done that. I chose not to. Whatever. And then there's a few little things where some cards probably could have used a little bit of cleanup on them. Nothing major there. That's about it. Once you get used to things, this card, pretty much enough to tell you what's going on in the game. So that's cool. These felt a little less than visible. But you can substitute something, blood tokens from magic or something like that would be much, much better. All right, let me send it up.